Hello, everybody, and today I'm going to be talking about a subject that I'm sure a lot of people have already talked about. Who can defeat One Punch Man? Now, before you click off the video, let me talk about this for a moment. This isn't necessarily going to be a conversation of, oh, this character can punch harder than One Punch Man. No. We've already seen on the show One Punch Man that Saitama, One Punch Man himself, is seemingly immune to being punched or hit or shot or virtually anything for that matter. So the question is, how do you defeat someone with unconventional means? Or to put it another way that isn't completely ridiculous, how do you defeat someone without punching them or shooting them or blasting them, etc.? Well, that's what I'm going to be talking about here today. So, the first on the list of people who can actually defeat One Punch Man, you're not going to believe this, the Spot from Marvel Comics. Who is the Spot? He's a supervillain of sorts who kind of looks like a Dalmatian. He's a villain who is literally covered in portals. Now, what do these portals do? They transport objects, or even act as the Spot's own personal teleporter. He once fought Spider-Man in a fight, and by using the portals on his body, he was able to make Spider-Man punch himself. Now, think about what would happen if Saitama punched himself. Would that defeat him, or would it have the same effect as anyone else? Point is, the Spot could potentially have an advantage here, purely on the fact that if Saitama tries to punch him, he can just throw up a portal, and Saitama will wind up punching himself instead. So that's one for the debates. Could the Spot defeat One Punch Man? Arguably one of the worst villains in all of comic books. Could he defeat Saitama, One Punch Man himself? The next on the list is Professor Xavier. We have not seen at any point in One Punch Man if he is immune to psychic attacks. We have seen that he is virtually invulnerable to telekinetic attacks, although we didn't really see much in the way of creativity when it came to those psychic attacks. The bizarrely named Gerisoshup, or however you pronounce that name, an alien which kind of looks like a tentacle monster, who is self-proclaimed the ultimate psychic power in the universe, or some ridiculous title like that. He created a telekinetic force equivalent to a black hole that dragged Saitama down into the hull of the ship. Now, whether or not that did anything is not really confirmed by the show. It's just suggested that did nothing, because the scene pretty much just goes, what do you think of my attack? Saitama just reaches up, scratches himself on the side of the head, and looks at Gerisoshup, or however you pronounce that name, with confusion, like, is this supposed to do something? So, that form of psychic attack does nothing, or rather, telekinesis does almost nothing to Saitama. But what about an attack on Saitama's mind? Could Professor Xavier convince Saitama to punch himself? Or could Professor Xavier manipulate Saitama's mind in such a way that he would just give up the fight, or just willingly stop breathing? This is one thing that's demonstrated in the show very briefly when Saitama was on the moon. he had to hold his breath, meaning that he does need to breathe. Could this be one of maybe a few weaknesses that Saitama actually has? It's unclear if Saitama is capable of flight or not, but that leaves another potential weakness that could be exploited by other villains. Could you just throw Saitama into space and just leave him adrift? What about throwing him into the sun, etc.? But psychic attacks on Saitama's brain, could that work? I guess we'll have to wait until Season 2 to see if Tornado finally loses her temper and tries to do something against Saitama. And just how extensive are her powers? Is she just another psychic? Or is... No, not psychic. Is she just another telekinetic? Or does she also have psychic powers? Anyway, that brings me to the next person on the list, Thanos, with his Infinity Gauntlet. The obvious answer would be, of course, since the Infinity Gauntlet, with all Infinity Gems present upon it, could essentially just erase anything and everything. Since Saitama is not entirely infallible, there are many things that the Infinity Gauntlet could potentially do. I'll let the comic book buffs discuss what the Infinity Gauntlet can do and what it can't do. But just from what I've heard of what the Infinity Gauntlet can and can't do, I would say yes, absolutely. That thing could easily erase Saitama from existence. So, nothing really all that surprising there. So, let's talk about some other characters and potential abilities that could defeat One Punch Man. What is One Punch Man capable of? The obvious answer is, well, he punches things, of course. He's capable of superhuman speed, and he has superhuman durability. What he most certainly doesn't have is any type of ability that manipulates things around him. So, could somebody who can manipulate time itself defeat One Punch Man? Someone like, say, Kronos from the DC Universe. Could he just go back in time to before Saitama had his powers, kill him, and prevent him from becoming One Punch Man? Or could someone like Dio Brando from JoJo's Bizarre Adventure just stop time, walk right up to Saitama, and drain him of all his blood? And I guess that raises the question of, could Dio Brando's fangs even get through Saitama's skin? Or would he just do that finger thing into Saitama's neck? Or would he even be able to do that, since Saitama seems to be virtually invulnerable to any type of physical trauma? I guess we should just stick to characters who have the ability to go back in time to before Saitama even had his abilities. So, Kronos from the DC Universe, an obvious pick, since he can go back and forth through time at will. And speaking of back in time, let's take a look at a mythological monster that could potentially defeat One Punch Man. Medusa. Could Medusa defeat One Punch Man just by looking at him? There's never really been any... there hasn't really been anything detailing whether or not Saitama is immune to curses or magical afflictions. So, could petrification kill One Punch Man? And I guess that also leaves the question of, does petrification count as death? I'm guessing no, since in Final Fantasy, petrification isn't necessarily a status effect that is death per se. I guess it depends on which version of Final Fantasy you're playing, because in Final Fantasy X, petrification was death. And in some other Final Fantasy games, petrification wasn't. The battle would actually continue to go on, but you would receive 0 damage if you got hit while petrified. So, also, why in the world does a golden needle reverse petrification? I don't know. Somebody let me know what the answer to that is in the comment section. But anyway, Medusa. Could petrification kill One Punch Man? I would say yes, since we haven't seen anything in continuity that would suggest otherwise. But back on the subject of psychic powers and telekinesis, could the Phoenix, or rather the Phoenix Force, or Jean Grey, while she possesses the Phoenix Force, defeat One Punch Man? Now, I realize this definitely wasn't anyone's favorite X-Men movie, but X3, The Last Stand, did depict one interesting use of psychic powers. Jean Grey used her psychic powers to atomize people, literally tear them apart, atom by atom, until they were nothing but dust. So, could something like that be used against One Punch Man? We have seen One Punch Man get what looks like bruises and a little bit of scarring on his skin. We haven't necessarily seen him bleed in such a way that it would suggest that he's vulnerable. I don't know what I'm really saying here. All I know is we haven't seen anything disproving atomizing as a method of finally defeating One Punch Man. But this next one is definitely the one to end all. This one is one that I'm honestly surprised a lot of people haven't noticed yet. But it's definitely one that I wouldn't be surprised most people overlooked. The one thing that could defeat One Punch Man. Your eyes are going to roll when you hear this one. Saitama's own gloves. I don't blame you for clicking off the video right now, but hear me out on this one. One Punch Man's own gloves can technically defeat him. How? Why? I'm sure these are questions that you're asking right now, so hear me out on this. Have you ever noticed that Superman doesn't wear gloves? There's a reason for that. Superman's punches are so immeasurably powerful that if he wore gloves in any capacity, they would be instantaneously obliterated. So, when we're talking about someone like One Punch Man, whose power seems to dwarf even Superman's, why is it that One Punch Man's gloves can survive his punches? The answer should be they shouldn't, but in the show, they clearly do. So, whatever the material that Saitama's gloves are made out of, is that his kryptonite? Are they immune to One Punch Man's attacks? Who's to say, really? Maybe this is just an animation error. Maybe this is something that the creators of the show just overlooked. But could it be that if you wore a costume made up of the same material that Saitama's gloves are made out of, would you be immune to Saitama's punches? That is a debate for the comment section. I am going to leave you on that. Thank you so much for tuning in. Hope to see you in the next video.